A monarch butterfly emerges from its chrysalis. A baby bird hatches from an egg. A kitten becomes a full-grown cat. All of these similar examples illustrates growth and development. Together, reproduction and development are shared features of all multicellular life. Like plants, animals may reproduce asexually or sexually. In asexual reproduction, the offspring contains genetic information coming from only one parent. The offsprings are identical to their parents and to one another. Asexual reproducing animals include sponges, sea anemones, aphids, and some types of lizards. In general, asexual reproduction is advantageous in environments that do not change much over time. However, in sexual reproduction, it requires two parents, each of which contributes half the DNA in each offspring. In a lot of species, sexual reproduction entails high energy costs for attracting mates, copulation, and defending against rivals. The benefits of genetic diversity apparently outweigh these costs, especially in a changing environment, and this kind of reproduction is common among animals. In organisms that reproduce sexually, haploid gametes are the sex cells that carry genetic information from each parent. The gametes are the sperm cells from the males, and the egg cells from the females are the products of meiosis. In meiosis, a diploid cell containing two sets of chromosomes divide into four haploid cells, each containing just one set of chromosomes. Fertilization is a union of two gametes. The product of fertilization is the zygote, the diploid first cell of the new offspring. Sperm and egg come together in a variety of ways. In external fertilization, males and females release gametes into the same environment, and fertilization occurs outside of the body. This strategy is common among aquatic animals. Salmon, for example, spawns in streams. The females lays egg in the nest and the males shed sperm over the eggs. Thus, external fertilization occurs. In internal fertilization, a male deposits sperm inside the female's body where fertilization occurs. Land animals, including mammals, non-avian reptiles, and birds, commonly use internal fertilization. No matter what the reproductive strategy is, development of sexually reproducing animals begins with the zygote. Development may be either indirect or direct. An animal that undergoes indirect development spends the early part of its life as a larva, an immature stage that looks different from an adult. A caterpillar, for example, is a larva that looks nothing like its butterfly parents. Likewise, a tadpole resembles a fish, not an adult frog or salamander where it came. Most of the time, larvae and tadpoles spend time eating and growing. Then, during a process called metamorphosis, the both matures into an adult. Humans and many other familiar animals undergo direct development. It is an infant resembles a smaller version of its parents. For example, a hatchling turtle, it is a miniature version of its parents. Both male and female reproductive system consist of organs that produce and transport the gametes. Each system includes a pair of gonads, which are the testes and the ovaries that contains the germ cells which give rise to the gametes, as well as the tubes that transport these gametes. In both sexes, hormones control the reproduction and development of secondary sex characteristics that distinguishes both sexes. For example, the enlarged breast, menstruation of adult females, and facial hair and deepening of the voice of adult males. Although, despite the similarities of both sexes, there are also obvious differences. The male reproductive organs are the inside and outside of the body. The paired testes are the male gonads. They are responsible for making male gametes, sperm, and the hormone testosterone. The testes lies in a sac called scrotum. Their location is outside of the body because it allows the testes to maintain a temperature about 3 degrees cooler than the rest of the body, which is necessary for proper spermatogenesis or for sperm to develop properly. Inside each testis contains a tunica albuginea that contains 150 sections called lobules, which are loaded with tightly coiled semiferrous tubules, which are the sperm factories that are made up of stratified epithelium cells called the basal lamina, straddling the central fluid lamen. Inside the tubules are the Sertoli cells, which are important as they nourish developing sperm cells. Around the tubules are the Leydig cells that secretes the hormone testosterone. Spermatogenesis is the production of sperm, and it begins when a male reaches puberty and continues throughout life. It is triggered when a male undergoes a hormonal cascade. Hormones play a critical role in male reproduction. When a male reaches puberty, in the brain, and the hypothalamus secretes the gonadotropin-releasing hormone, or the GnRH, a water-soluble hormone that travels in the bloodstream to the anterior pituitary gland, where it simulates the release of follicle-stimulating hormone, or the FSH, and the luteinizing hormone, or the LH, into the blood. Similar to the females, LH leads to the release of estrogen in the follicles, where in males, it generates the Leydig cells to release testosterone. Testosterone affects the body in multiple ways. In adolescence, the hormone stimulates the development of the secondary sex characteristics. The testes and penis begins to enlarge at puberty. Hair grows on the face, armpits, and groins. It also stimulates the secretion of growth hormones, causing a spurt that increases height, boosts muscle mass, and deepens the voice. The FSH triggers the Sertoli cells to release androgen-binding proteins, or ABP. The ABP binds to the testosterone, creating a large local concentration that triggers the production of sperm. The outermost cells in the tubules are called the spermatogonia, the targets of the testosterone. They are stem cells that set the sperm-making process in motion by dividing. Sperm production begins with the diploid germ cells that reside within the walls of the semiferous tubule. The germ cells have nuclei containing 46 chromosomes. During the early stages of puberty, when the testosterone causes the germ cells to divide mitotically, it divides into two identical daughter cells. One daughter cell remains in the tubule wall and acts as a stem cell, continually giving the rise to cells that becomes the sperm. The other cell becomes a diploid primary spermatocyte that accumulates the cytoplasm and moves closer to the tubule's lumen or the central cavity. In the walls of the semiferous tubule, the primary spermatocyte undergoes meiosis I, yielding two haploid secondary spermatocytes. These cells undergo meiosis II, forming four round haploid cells called the spermatids that each contains 23 chromosomes. As the spermatids moves into the lumen of the semiferous tubule, they complete their differentiation into mature sperm cells through spermiogenesis, in which they separate into individual cells and develop a tail or flagella. In the end, each primary spermatocyte gives rise to 4 actual sperm, and a mature male can produce 1,500 sperm in a second. Once the sperm cells are in the lumen, a smooth muscle called myoid cells contract using peristalsis to squeeze sperm and fluids secreted by the Sertoli cells towards their next destination, the rete testis. From there, a maze of small ducts carries developing sperm to the left or right epididymis. It is a tightly coiled tube that receives and stores sperm from one testis. Inside the ducts is a full of tiny microvilli called stereocilia that provides a huge surface area to reabsorb extra fluid and help pass along nutrients to feed the idling sperm. It takes sperm nearly 20 days to work their way through the epididymis, in which they continue to mature. Once through the duct, they enter the inferior epididymis, where they gain mitochondria to gain energy to swim hard throughout the epididymis. Each epididymis opens into a vas deferens, a duct that travels upward out of the scrotum, bends behind the bladder, and connects with the left or right ejaculation duct, which connects into the vas deferens with the urethra. The two ejaculation ducts passes into the prostate gland, where they empty into the urethra, the tube that extends the length of the cylindrical penis and carries both urine and semen out of the body. Semen, a mixture of sperm, testicular fluid, and gland secretions, provides sperm with transportation, nutritional energy, and chemical protection and activates their mobility. The seminal vesicles are a pair of small, hollow glands which opens into each vas deferens that secretes most of the components in the semen. The secretion also includes fructose and prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are homo-like lipids that may stimulate contraction in the female reproductive tract that help to propel sperm by decreasing the viscosity of the female cervical mucus and triggers a reverse peristalsis of the uterus that helps draw sperm up the female reproductive tract. In addition, the prostate gland wraps around the part of the urethra and contributes a thin, milky alkali fluid that activates the sperm to move and swim thoroughly. Below the prostate gland is a bulbourethral gland that secretes clear mucus that drains into the urethra to clear out any acidic prior to ejaculation. During sexual arousal, the penis becomes erect, enabling it to penetrate the vagina and deposit semen in the female reproductive tract. At the peak of sexual stimulation, a pleasurable sensation called orgasm occurs, accompanied by rhythmic muscular contractions that eject the semen through the urethra and out of the penis. Internally, the penis contains 3 layers of erectile tissue, each wrapped in a layer of dense fibrous connective tissue. This spongy network is made of connective tissue and smooth muscles that contain tiny vascular spaces that fills with blood during sexual arousal that makes the penis expand and erect. Ejaculation is the discharge of semen from the penis. One human ejaculation typically delivers more than 100 million sperm cells. The females produces egg cells. Egg cell production in females is somewhat more complicated than sperm formation in males. The female genitalia, or the external anatomy of the female sexual organ, involves the vulva that includes the mons pubis, the labia majora, and the labia minora. The labia majora and labia minora are the elongated skin that protects the vestibule. Within the skin is a vagina. It is where it receives the penis during intercourse, and it is where menstrual blood and the baby passes through during birth. The female reproductive organs are found inside of the body. The female sex cells develops within the ovaries, which are the paired gonads of the females. The ovaries produce and release both egg cells and sex hormones like estrogen and progesterone. Each ovary is found in a fibrous sac that consists of a layer of connective tissue called the tunica albuginea. The ovarian follicles are the basic reproductive units in the cortex. These are tiny sac-like structures that each hold a single primary oocyte, the cells that give rise to mature egg cells. Within each ovary of a newborn female are about 1 million oocytes, but right around after birth, the oocytes stop developing and only resumes once a month at the beginning of puberty. Approximately once a month, at the beginning of puberty, one ovary releases a single, most mature egg that is either fertilized or dies to make way for a new egg. The male and female reproductive system rely on many of the same hormones. Females, however, produces these hormones in different quantities on a different schedule. When a female undergoes puberty, the hypothalamus and pituitary gland sets two interrelated cycles. The menstrual cycle prepares the uterus for pregnancy as it captures any mature fertilized eggs, and the ovarian cycle controls the maturation of the follicle and egg and secretes sex hormones in what drives the menstrual cycle. In the hypothalamus, it starts the ovarian cycle by secreting the gonadotropin-releasing hormone once a month. It is a sex hormone that stimulates the anterior pituitary gland to release FSH and LH into the bloodstream. The FSH stimulates the growth of a single follicle that happens to be the farthest and most developed at the time. In the ovaries, receptors on the surface of the follicle cells bind to FSH, stimulating the follicles to grow and mature and to release estrogen. With the estrogen being released, it stimulates the anterior pituitary gland to secrete another LH that surges into the bloodstream that triggers the long-awaited division to start again. The process takes 14 days before the follicle becomes mature, and once matured, it pushes up against the ovarian wall, ruptures, and releases a single mature oocyte. Oogenesis is the production of eggs, and it begins when the female reaches puberty. The egg cell begins with a diploid germ cell that contains 4 to 6 chromosomes. Each germ cell grows, divides mitotically, and becomes two primary oocytes. In meiosis 1, the cytoplasm of the primary oocyte divides unevenly as it splits into a large haploid secondary oocyte and a much smaller haploid polar body, each containing 23 chromosomes. A process called ovulation is the release of the secondary oocyte from its follicle. Following the ovulation, then now a ruptured follicle transforms into a gland called the corpus luteum. The corpus luteum slows its estrogen production and eventually degenerates, but releases a final hormonal projections of progesterone, little amounts of estrogen, and some inhibins that inhibits the release of both LH and FSH. These hormones also prepare the uterus for receiving the oocyte, which then leaves down the finger-like projections of the two fallopian tubes where it meets the sperm. The fallopian tubes are 10 cm long and are passageways for a mature oocyte to pass from the ovaries to the uterus and where fertilization occurs. The cervix is a neck-like narrowing at the lower end of the uterus. The uterus is a muscular sac-like organ, and during pregnancy, the fetus or the womb develops inside the uterus. The uterine wall is composed of 3 layers: the perimetrium, the myometrium, and the endometrium. The perimetrium is on the outside. The myometrium is a smooth muscle that contracts during labor, and the endometrium, the inner lining of the uterus. It is in the endometrium where the zygote goes in when fertilization happens. Meiosis halts at metaphase 2 and does not complete unless a sperm contacts a secondary oocyte. In that case, the secondary oocyte divides unequally to produce a small additional polar body and the mature egg that contains 23 chromosomes. From puberty to menopause, monthly hormonal cues prompt an ovary to release one secondary oocyte into the fallopian tube. If a sperm penetrates the oocyte membrane, meiosis soon the oocyte completes, and the nuclei from the two parents combine to form a diploid zygote. The human infant begins life as a zygote, and it is in fertilization where it initiates pregnancy. After intercourse, a sperm cell swims toward the oocyte. Of the 100 sperm that begins the journey in the vagina, only about 200 approaches the egg cell in the fallopian tube. Those that did make it to the mature egg cell undergoes fertilization. 24 hours after fertilization, a little zygote turns from one cell into 16 cells called blastomeres. About 3 days after fertilization, a berry-shaped cluster of cells is formed called the corolla. The cells making up the corolla don't stay together as a solid mass, but instead, they form a hollow sphere fluid called a blastocyte. A blastocyte contains a singular outer layer of large flat trophoblast cells which eventually forms the placenta, while on the inside, a cluster of small cells is formed, called the inner cell mass, which eventually turns into the embryo. While this is happening, the morula is on the move to the uterus. When the blastocytes arrive at the uterus, it floats around for a few days as it soaks up secretions of vitamins and glycoproteins. A week after ovulation, it attaches to the endometrial layer and begins the process of implantation. Surges of estrogen and progesterone from the corpus luteum prepares the endometrium to receive the blastocyte, allowing the uterine lining to bind on the trophoblast, holding onto them for the duration of pregnancy. Implantation takes about 5 days and finishes up around 12 days after ovulation, right around when menstruation would otherwise kick in and sloughs off the endometrium. The trophoblast then secretes a luteinizing-like hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin or HCG, which signals the corpus luteum to keep pumping out estrogen and progesterone. The blastocyte then differentiates into various cell types and develops into an embryo, surrounded by an amniotic sac and hooked up with the placenta. The placenta is an organ that only appears during pregnancy and is created by the melding of both maternal and the embryonic tissue. Along with the umbilical cord, it provides for the direct transfer of nutrients, hormones, and waste between mother and offspring. After 8 weeks, it officially now becomes a fetus. The growing placenta still secreting estrogen and progesterone, but now also secretes relaxin, a hormone that loosens joints and ligaments to increase flexibility, as well as the human placental lactogen or HPL. This hormone combination allows the fetus to grow, as well as the breast ready to lactate, and causes the mother's body to start hoarding glucose for fetus to use. As the due date nears, a mother undergoes a sudden decline in progesterone. Estrogen now takes over, telling the uterus to get ready for birth and start releasing hormones like cortisol that tells the placenta to release even more estrogen to get the uterus ready for birth. It also prepares the uterus to start receiving new hormones such as oxytocin and also triggers the formation of gap junctions between smooth muscles in the uterus, allowing the individual muscle cells to contract simultaneously when the time comes. As labor nears, special cells in the fetus itself start secreting oxytocin and tell the placenta to release prostaglandins. Both hormones, oxytocin and prostaglandins, stimulate the uterine muscle to contract. When contractions get strong enough to descend the cervix, it stimulates the release of even more oxytocin and prostaglandins, which keeps the contractions rolling and initiates labor. Each new contraction pushes the infant's head against the cervix, dilating it about 10 centimeters. Once fully dilated, the mother should feel the urge to push. The resulting expulsion pushes the infant's head first, through the cervix and out of the vagina. Within 30 minutes of delivery, strong contractions carry out the placental stage of labor, dislodge the placenta from the uterine wall, and deliver the so-called afterbirth. A sexually reproducing organism consists mostly of diploid cells, which contains two full sets of chromosomes. Each diploid cell contains 46 chromosomes and are arranged in 23 pairs. Of the 23 chromosome pairs, in a human cell, 22 pairs consist of the autosomes, chromosomes that are the same for both sexes, but for the remaining pair is made up of two sex chromosomes, which determines whether an individual is male or female. Sex chromosomes is determined at the time of fertilization. A chromosome from the sperm cell, either X or Y, fuses with X chromosomes in the egg cell, and over the next 5 weeks, the fetus begins producing hormones that causes its sex organs to grow. Females have two X chromosomes, whereas males have one X and one Y chromosome. Birth control or contraception is the use of devices or practices that prevents the union of sperm and egg. There are different classes of contraceptives which helps prevent pregnancy. First, let's talk about the barrier contraceptives. Examples are the condoms for males, and for the females are the diaphragms, sponges, cervical caps, and female condoms. Barrier contraceptives prevents pregnancy by physically keeping the sperm and egg on either side of a wall, which is usually latex. Hormonal contraceptives such as pills, shots, or patches utilize synthetic estrogen and progestin to prevent the progression of the ovarian cycle to ovulation and can make changes to other vaginal barriers to help breed your sperm. A more permanent option is sterilization, in which a doctor either snips, blocks, burns, or ties up the female's fallopian tube, thus ending the gamete express by permanently preventing the sperm or egg from ever getting to the penis or uterus respectively. Some of the most common sexually transmitted infections are the HIV or AIDS, genital warts, cervical cancer, and genital herpes. HIV comes from the human immunodeficiency virus or HIV and can be treated by a combination of drugs that reduce viral replications. Genital warts or cervical cancer are both caused by the human papillomavirus or the HPV. Genital warts can be treated by removing the warts, and the cervical cancer can be treated by surgery, radiation, and chemotherapy. Lastly, genital herpes are caused by the herpes simplex virus and can be treated with medications that reduce outbreak frequency and duration.